The most sure that I've ever been that I was going to be fired was after the John Mayer episode. Wow, what an amazing run it's been.
In 2015, a pop culture-obsessed journalist from suburban Chicago had an idea. While anchoring for Complex News, Sean Evans was tapped by First We Feast founder Chris Schonberger to host Hot Ones, a YouTube talk show with a ridiculous premise that would soon find even more ridiculous success.
I don't know what to do.
Evans and Schonberger took a deceptively simple idea and gave it depth with rigorous research, sharp editing, and an undeniable respect for the classic interview format.
You are a very good interviewer.
In 10 years, Hot Ones has amassed over 1 billion views on YouTube and spawned a cottage industry of spice-centric products. But the ride to the top came with its own heat.
Do you think that when you were in those negotiations, the people that you were negotiating against really believed that they could replace you?
There were so many dark days over the course of this that I thought, well, that might be it. I feel like somebody who's just grabbing doors and walking into rooms and being like, is anyone going to stop me? Okay, no, well, then I guess I'll grab the next doorknob.
The latest door to open led to their biggest move yet, when Sean and Chris partnered with Soros Capital to buy First We Feast and Hot Ones from Buzzfeed for a whopping $82.5 million.
Nobody spends $80 million to acquire an asset to continue status quo. What is the plan for the business?
Well,
and it all started with one idea.
Whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, cool.
Good.
Yeah. Welcome to Idea Generation, Sean.
thanks so much for having me, Noah.
We obviously know each other. Thank you very much for accepting the job offer back in 2013. Seems like it's worked out pretty well for you.
So far, so good. Thanks for accepting that, and you too, Jack, because I know that you were the reason sitting off stage here.
In going through some of your recent interviews, something that you said a couple years ago stuck out to me. You mentioned that your main motivation in life is to avoid humiliation. Where does that come from?
I have no idea where it comes from, but I think in terms of the interview, I do remember there was this moment in college, and I was a broadcast journalism major, and I was sitting down with someone, and we were just doing like a news story on like boil orders or like something, the very central Illinois kind of news story. And, I was living like a college life. It's not like I was preparing for this interview. And I sat down with this person, and it was apparent to her and apparent to me that I had like no real idea what I was talking about, didn't do all that much in the way of prep, didn't take it that seriously. And I remember feeling so horrible about it afterwards, because here's this person who's just doing this. Like, it's not actually even a real news story. It's this student broadcast. So there's this person that's like in Champaign and thinking to themselves like, oh, I'll do like a nice thing for a broadcast journalism student and do a play pretend interview with them. And then I felt so disrespectful coming in there unprepared. And that was really an eye-opening moment for me, and a feeling that I never wanted to have again. So I think that that's where it started in kind of a professional context. But I also think that it's a very motivating thing. We do this thing where we're set up on a stage, we have all these cameras pointed at us, and then this is going to be absorbed at scale and judged at scale and all of those different things. So I think everything about it sets yourself up to embarrass yourself, and just doing creative work in general is embarrassing. So all of those things I think are motivating for me, but it comes from like a pathological place more than anything.
How much of your professional sort of journey would you say has been guided by, watching your parents?
Mostly it was just human qualities that I picked up from my parents. Like my mom was so nice, so hardworking. I think that that's where I get that from. And then my dad was just a punch in, punch out, just kind of to the train every morning at 6 a.m., home at 6:30 p.m. every night. So that's sort of just day in and day out grind. But my dad was a huge Letterman fan.
Yes.
And I remember one of the fun things that would happen was like when my mom was out of town on business, the fun naughty thing that like I could do with my dad we'd watch Letterman together. Like I remember that in just sort of a core memory way being very influential in sort of my obsession with talk shows, my obsession with talk radio, and all of these things that would snowball, build on itself all the way through college into what I do now.
You mentioned your experience in college. Unlike most of your competitive peers in the sort of interview show, podcast space, you have a degree in broadcast journalism. A college dropout. I'm very curious, what would you say is sort of the most important thing that you picked up in school?
Think that, back then you'd just one-man band. So it'd just be like you with the tripod, the camera, you're in an editing bay and editing everything on Avid, shooting everything yourself, troubleshooting problems with the camera. Why is this in zebra mode? All of those different things. And that really did serve as a good education for what you do now. Because I think there was a time where you'd just be an interviewer, you'd just be a host, but now you're much more involved and kind of have your hand in every honeypot of the production. And it's much more than just a single job on a conveyor belt. So I think that was really important. I also think it was really important in unlocking confidence. Like I did have a great professor, who was like, oh, you're really good at this, like this is something that you could do. And I never heard that from anyone before. So I think that was important as well. But also my summer job was really important with that. I did architecture tours of the Chicago River, Lake Michigan, where I'm up there doing 5 tours a day, talking to 150, 200 people on a boat. And that did a lot to, really recognize an audience, how they react to certain things. Are there parts of your tour that people are poking each other and pointing at the building and they have this like nice little tidbit that they can then take to a dinner party? Or are they taking pictures? Is there another part of the tour where they're checking their phones or they're chatting amongst themselves? How can I tune those things up? How can I optimize the things that are going well? How can I make the lulls more interesting? So I think that those two things working together at the same time really was a concentrated and profound education for what I do now.
It's interesting you talk about the sort of public speaking of it all. I always consider myself a writer and an editor first. This is sort of something that I've learned along the way. And I think, I've always said to be a writer, you have to think that you have the most important thing to say about something. What is the conviction that undergirds the desire to be on-camera talent?
I don't even know if I had those kinds of dreams early on. Like the highest I ever dreamed was that someday I'd be a producer for like an AM radio morning drive talk sports radio show in Chicago, like ESPN 1000 or 670 The Score. I never even really had those kinds of dreams for it. But I do think that once I was in that kind of arena, then you have this amazing responsibility of actually like you're taking other people's time. So you have to make it worth it. You have to meet the audience halfway. And that is an agreement that I understood in a very real way from the second, I was given an opportunity to be on camera. When it started, Jack, when I'm at All-Star Weekend and I'm doing those interviews, that was the first time I was anything was on camera, but it was because Complex had just launched a YouTube channel and they needed these interviews that were supposed to be for print to be on camera. So that's how that happened, and then they went well enough for you guys to offer me a job. And then I meet Chris and he has this idea, so in a lot of ways I was just a Plinko ball that ended up in this unique position.
My ideas just come to me. And sometimes through squeezing my brain and just staring at a wall for 30 minutes and feeling like I want to give up on it, but I never do, and they just kind of drop in.
I know that you had some initial reluctance and in fact turned down the job, and Jack had to sort of chase you down physically and then on the internet to convince you to come take this opportunity. Where do you think you would be now if you had held fast in that?
You know what? I don't have any idea. I would have maybe been like a copywriter forever. I think that that's where I would have been my whole life probably. You know, I really have no idea. And I do remember that moment, you know, because I love Chicago. I miss Chicago. My friends are in Chicago. My family's in Chicago. I had a whole life there. And so the idea of uprooting it for this chance was just something that I didn't have the courage to take advantage of when it first happened. But I do remember the next day, I couldn't sleep that night. I was tossing and turning, and I was just so disappointed in myself. And then I'm trying to drum up the courage to call Jack and beg for the job. And I remember while I'm having this debate in my head, Jack calls me and he goes in, he's like, listen, I'm going to take one last stab at this. And he's talking me through and, you know, and if you're worried about, you know, like money, these are like affordable neighborhoods in Brooklyn. He went on this very long spiel. And the whole time I'm only half listening because I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Like, let's do it. And at the end of the call, Jack was like, well, what do you think? And I go, get me on a plane before I change my mind. And he goes, what, really? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, when can you start? And I was like, just let's start now. And so then, yeah, I quit my job and sold all my stuff and broke my lease. And I was in New York 30 days later. And ever since then, I've had a great deal of respect for the ways that your life can just dramatically change overnight.
You know, when I reflect on that first class of complex news anchors, it's pretty incredible. You know, you look at where everyone is now, and Jinx, you know, a string of podcasts, a Nike shoe, Emily with a $50 million business in Sporty and Rich. Hanuman is the face of rock on Apple Music, and even the coach Cornell is a partner in PG Lang.
And Speedy too.
Oh yes, and of course Speedy. Was there a fundamental characteristic that you guys shared, or was there something in that experience that was incredibly formative that sort of foreshadowed these shared successes?
Well, you know, what I think was interesting about it is it was a little ragtag, you know, like it's not like people came from, you know, all this experience elsewhere and were brought into this position. It was kind of, we were all rookies in it together. So I think we had that shared thing in common. But then I do think it just worked out really well. Like it's just one of those things that all the pieces fell into place in a unique way.
Speaking of that early time in complex news, I can remember there was one day I'm coming to the office and I look at Twitter and I see The Rock's diet has leaked and seems to be viral. And going into the, whatever it was, Tuesday morning meeting, being like, oh, guys, someone should do The Rock's diet, which somehow I don't remember if it was particularly begrudging, if we had to like strong arm you into it or if you just volunteered for it. But, you know, you ended up making that video, doing The Rock's diet, and creating, I believe it was like a 3 million view video.
Yeah.
Getting The Rock's retweet with a like, way to go, brother, or whatever. You know, that was your first moment of sort of virality, but also, I think, making a video that really centered you and your personality, not doing like a news stand-up or whatever. Yeah. What was that sort of first rush of, you know, internet fame like?
Well, I think there is something special about like the first thing that you make that breaks 1 million views, you know, like that just seems like a bar, like, oh, if I could just have a video do that, you know, then my whole life would snap into place or something. So there was that side of it. But the thing that I remember most about that day was how much food he eats, you know, like, so each plate comes out, it weighs as much as a Range Rover tire. It's like bland, it's like cod and vegetables, and it's so excruciating to finish just one plate of it. And then by the time you finish that plate, another plate comes, you know? And when you think about like the calories that you have to burn in the gym, like all of that stuff, I just remember that being so crazy. But it was a good kind of, I can do this, I can play in this world kind of thing. You have that validation from an audience that was tapped in and interested in this kind of storytelling. So you're like, oh, well, how can I do that again and again and again and again and again? But the motivation was never like for me or like what it could do for me. It was just like, oh, lots of people were entertained by this. And that was the rush or the high for me.
I mean, I always thought it was interesting how you kind of like laid this gingerbread trail to, you know, from that to the Sean Evans challenge to then Hot Ones with this through line of, you know, sort of a you experiencing extreme conditions kind of thing and, you know, navigating that and again, centering your own personality within it. I remember Hot Ones in its infancy because Nick Schonberger, Chris's brother, came to me asking if I thought I could get Paul Rosenberg to eat spicy wings because on his blog, Rosenblog, he was reviewing buffalo wings on, I guess, tour with Marshall or something like that. And I was like, I don't know, that Paul doesn't seem like, it's not really his bag. And then him and Chris continually catching me in the hallway, telling me, oh, you know, this idea around interview format, spicy wings, and being like, hey, if you guys can get talent to agree to do that, like, go for it, man. It sounds great. And then we end up one day with none other than Tony Yayo coming into the office and an occupied music team. What was your experience leading into Hot Ones? Like, how was the idea posited to you?
Chris just kind of was like, you know, I have this idea of interviewing celebrities, but having them eat increasingly spicy chicken wings over the course of the interview as a way to break them down. And I was thinking that you could host it, you know, and just that was like a Cupid's arrow into my brain. So I immediately understood the idea of it all. And I was like, oh, well, this could work. Plus, I needed a project. You know what I mean? Like, it was one of those things, too, like where you could talk about the Plinko ball. And it's like, well, Chris needed an affordable host and I needed a project. You know, like there's those two things. So it was kind of just this perfect matrimony. And then I did recognize early on, you know, we did a Tony Yayo episode. We did a Machine Gun Kelly episode early on. And I'd see the way that, you know, like people are pacing around the studio. They're screaming. They're reacting, they're crying, they're up on the table, they're drinking from the water pitcher, you know, all of this stuff that was just electric in the room that I knew would translate so magnificently to video. So even though it wasn't a big hit early on, I did recognize and kind of see the vision of everything that's happened in like the first 6 months of doing the show.
It's crazy. Well, Tony also, as I understand it, had a integral role in developing the format, no?
Yeah, no, he did. I think originally the idea would be that it would be this like swinging light interrogation sort of interview show where the guest is eating wings. And Tony was like, well...
And you would not be eating wings.
Right, not necessarily. Like
Okay.
we hadn't really worked out that part of it. But it was Tony who was like, no, like you have to eat the wings. I think we were on the fence on that. And then Tony pushed it over being like, well, and he's right. Like what self-respecting famous person is just going to come in and subject themselves to that while this guy just sort of like off camera is peppering them with questions. You know, like even looking back on it, it's so obvious. But yes, we can thank Tony Yayo for completing the Rubik's Cube of the Hot Ones format for sure.
What is the anatomy of a perfect question?
The anatomy of a perfect question is one that elicits a true human reaction. You know, I think an interview is kind of set up in this way to not really work. You know, you're talking to somebody for the very first time. You're trying to create this rhythm, this energy, this rapport, this sense of trust. And I think that when something can disrupt that or penetrate everything about that and actually get to a true human reaction or a true human answer, then that's the anatomy of a perfect question.
We talked a little bit about your parents earlier, and in the immortal words of Tony Yayo, shout out Mike Evans, can you tell me about the role that Gavin Evans plays in Hot Ones?
So he's my little brother, and basically he's a workhorse. So whenever we have an interview, like this person is coming up, like I need a research dossier by this date, you know, and that's what he does. And he's been with us, I think, since the Ty Burrell episode, which is, you know, like 7-8 years ago, something like that, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I think that no matter how successful Hot Ones has become, it does always feel like a family business. And in some ways, that's literal. But in many ways, it's like, you know, the same people have been doing it since day one. Like, yeah, the team has gotten bigger, but the core of it has always been, you know, kind of the same producer, same researcher, same host, same director, you know, like all the way down, same editor all the way through. So all of that has been very special, and Gavin for sure plays a big role in that.
You know, you mentioned many of the behind-the-scenes players, and some of whom have had moments on camera, Chris, Sarah, Dom, of course. And, you know, when I talk to Chris about First We Feast and about Hot Ones, you know, he always refers to it as the pirate ship. What is the key to the chemistry within that team?
Well, I think number one is everyone's a problem solver. So I think that that's the most important thing. Like our producer, Dom, it's not like she had producing experience before this, but she was just a problem solver, which I recognized early on. And that's basically what a producer does. So I'm like, well, this woman can solve a problem. Like, let's give her more problems to solve. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it works with everyone. But I think the thing that binds us is this idea that we are always, at times going to have to sacrifice, at times going to have to work harder, at times going to have to stay later, work a weekend, because there is this audience that depends on us for this entertainment that they get every Thursday at 11 a.m. So I think everybody understands that mission through and through. That's what it really comes down to. We're all inspired by this audience that we've been fortunate enough to build.
Well, working with the same people for 10 years and, with the stakes that you mentioned, I imagine there has to be some conflict that has to get mediated. What is the biggest fight that you've had with Chris and Sarah?
Chris, the fights that I've had with Chris and Sarah, but it's funny that you say that because we do have a way that we solve conflict. And it's like everyone has a key. And if two keys turn and one doesn't, then you go with the side that the two keys turn on, So it's always like there's always a 2-3 vote thing that we do to take care of issues. Fights that I've had with Chris, sometimes he can be in a growth mindset, which of course he is as a CEO, And I can be like, I want this black box theater, like pirate radio kind of show. You know what I mean? Where sometimes like we can brush up against each other on the enterprising of the whole thing. But then of course, I enjoy the fruits of that on the other side. You know what I mean? So even though we might have these fights, it usually works out. Overall, that's how we solve issues, is it's a 2-vote-to-1 situation, and then we just move on.
Speaking of friction, being an executive at Complex, I was sort of party to, at least in the background, watching the evolution of your relationship with the company from being a, W-2 employee with health benefits to eventually becoming a star and then, leaving the company and becoming talent that is contracted by the company. And, at times that relationship was somewhat contentious. I'm very happy to say that I had very little to do with any of that, but I remember, there was definitely moments where it felt like it could all fall apart.
Yeah.
Did you ever experience a moment where you really felt like this might not work out?
Yeah, I mean, when I look back on it, every contract negotiation was pretty, I don't know how close I flew to the sun on all of these, but there was always that threat.
What was the threat?
Well, there was a couple along the way, but I do remember like, hey, you've done such a great job like building the show. It'd be a shame if like someone else hosted it. Like those kinds of conversations I've had before. But I remember the closest I've ever like known I was going to get fired was leading into the John Mayer episode. That was like the end of the season and the end of my talent deal. And it looked very bleak. And I remember Chris and I going to the Harvard Club and having that like, wow, what an amazing run it's been. And it was kind of cinematic in that it was raining outside and we had tears in our eyes and hugged each other on the street and we'd be like, we'll get going on the next project. So there have been a handful of times along the way that I thought it was over for us.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, in prepping for this interview, I talked to Joe LaPuma. And one of the things that Joe said was, the thing that he admires most about you is he's like, look, in this world of media that we live in, he hangs out with a lot of big movers and shakers and a lot of people who posture as if they're playing with house money. And he said, no one actually believes it more than Sean Evans. And that is, he finds just so admirable. Do you think that's a fair characterization?
Yeah, I do. And I've had a lot of these chats with Joe, and I do think I have decent perspective. And I think in part because I didn't experience any success until after my 30th birthday anyway, so I think that was helpful. And then I do not have like world takeover kind of aspirations, like, oh, my name needs to be in lights and I want to leave this legacy. And, I've already done 10 laps around any expectation I ever had for myself. And I feel very comfortable in the work that I've put in to get here. Like I know that I put everything that I have into getting where I am. So I don't feel at all entitled to this kind of success. I don't feel at all entitled to people's attention or to an audience's attention. So in behaviors change and tastes change and all of those different things do. So if that's it, then that's it, and I know that I'll look back at this time in my life and with a big smile on my face and then be like, that was so exciting. I can't believe I got to do that, But I think that once you start achieving success and start to believe in yourself and start to believe in the thing that you've created, then it's like you climb to the top of a mountain and then you just see the next peak and you're like, well, I do like climbing, so I'll just go to that next one. And then you get to that one and you get a view of the next one and you just keep climbing and climbing and climbing. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. Or I feel like somebody who's just grabbing doors and walking into rooms and being like, is anyone going to stop me? No. All right, I guess I'll grab the next doorknob. Is anyone going to stop me? Okay, no. Well, then I guess I'll grab the next doorknob.
Do you think that when you were in those negotiations, the people that you were negotiating against really believed in their heart that they could replace you?
You never know. I mean, that's the whole thing is like after going through this a handful of times, and this, but egos become involved and then that can cloud judgment anyway. You know what I mean? So, and there's always a line that you're going towards. Like in any negotiation, you're just like, well, how close can I get to this line without going over? So you're always playing that game. But no, I think that there are times that they believed that they could. But I always knew, I'm like, all right, you got to find somebody that's going to care about this, the way that I care about it. Somebody who's going to appeal to the audience the way that I appeal to the audience. Somebody who's going to care about the interview the way that I care about the interview. Sure, maybe you can find that person. But can you find that person who can also eat the bomb once a week? You know what I mean? Like, there was always that one thing that I was just like, all right, well, you might get a new host and maybe they can rally through 5 episodes and maybe make it through a season, but are they going to run it back? Are they going to run it back? Are they going to run it back? Are they going to run it back and do this for like 10 years? Like, no way. Like, I am actually that unicorn. And the reason is because I'm in love with the show. It's my baby. I created it with people that I love. I make it with people that I love. I watch the show every Thursday. Still to this day, every Thursday night after my day, I put it on the big screen and I watch that new Hot Ones episode and I look forward to it just like a fan would.
There was a moment where there had been a deal offered by MTV, that was going to
bring this up.
They did want to take the show off of YouTube, as I recall. Is that, and you essentially put your foot down and deaded that?
Yeah. So that's one of the most proud moments of me protecting the show that I've ever had, because at that time, and you remember this time, is I didn't have the kind of juice that I have now.
No, this was like
2 years in. Yeah, exactly. But I already saw that the trajectory was headed. Like, we'd passed 1 million subscribers. And then one day I came into the office and they were like, hey, good news for you. You don't have a YouTube show anymore, you have a TV show. And I was like, what? And then they were like, yeah, we sold the show to MTV2. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because I'm like, what do you mean and there was this moment, right, where I was like, this isn't happening. That was a good threat. That was a good threat in my career, time in my life, actually. That was a good time. So, because I remember like somebody saying to me like, well, the contract's signed, Sean, like that's a big boy lesson for you. Like I remember somebody saying that to me. And then I remember being like, well, my tummy hurts. Like I don't think I can eat scorching hot chicken wings anymore. I knew that I had that card to play. And yeah, they were going to put it on MTV2. And I'm like, what the fuck? MTV2 just has Martin reruns around the clock. Like, I don't even know what's on MTV2. I'm like one of the last people that pays for cable. I can't find MTV2. And then they were telling me it would be on demand. I remember one day I made a video where I'm like, all right, I'm in my apartment. I'm opening the on-demand thing. Like, where is MTV2? Like, why are we going to find Hot Ones? Like, people who watch Hot Ones, how can they even possibly watch Hot Ones? And I was just trying to warn everybody of the impending doom of this decision. And I wasn't really taken seriously at that time. But I did know at the end of the day, I'm like, if I don't feel right doing this, it's not going to happen. Like I'm a very stubborn person that way, and I very much have the walls up in that way. And I was like, I know you guys all think this is going to happen. This is not going to happen. And then it didn't happen.
You had the fastest fastball.
And that's kind of a story of legend too. Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, just in this particular instance, like I did feel like there were guys that didn't really understand where this industry was going, trying to tell me what was going to happen with the show. And then along the way being like, well, you don't really have a say here. And then me going like, just trust me, in this particular situation, my fastball is faster than yours. And I did say that. And then it was just, met with a hurricane, but all of those things needed to happen. Like it was one of those moments where we had to throw a big tantrum and break some stuff and like just really stand up for the show. And like as time has gone on, like I've just been more and more validated in that, but I knew that was true in the moment. I think my biggest advantage is my work ethic. I really do think that, say what you will about me, but I am a very hard worker. And I also just have an appreciation and an enthusiasm for stories and people's stories. So, I wouldn't say that I have the hardest job in the world, but it certainly is time consuming and it can be tedious at times if you don't have that natural enthusiasm. So I think that that's where it all comes from, is just curiosity, hard work ethic, and a sense of perspective.
You've made quite a big deal about the importance of new media and campaigned recently to be included in the Emmys, in the Primetime Emmys. What would the validation of an old media award like that mean for you personally and also for the business?
Well, we have this, novel hook and like very internet-y hook, but all of my influences have been like people like Howard Stern and Conan O'Brien and David Letterman and Jimmy Kimmel and Adam Carolla and all of these talk show hosts that I grew up watching in a very traditional way. So all of my influences have been traditional, and even the way that we approach our show, like yes, it has this unique hook, but we are traditionalists in that everything that informs the way that we interview is very like blocking and tackling, X's and O's, just like very classic. So in that case, I think that the way that we make the show is the same way that shows are made on television. And then if you look at Hot Ones, its place in culture, the size of its audience, the guests that we get, and for how long we've been doing it, that's something that I'll say with my chest is that, it deserves to be in competition with all of those other shows, So that is just like a personal thing that I believe in. And then as far as what it does for like the show is, there's no real award for excellence in internet, in the world of the internet,
yes.
And so I think that having a new carrot on the end of the stick, like something to motivate you, is good. I've been doing this for a long time, so having something like that is just good to put in front of you, is just a goal to chase. But I think too, it's like, advertisers are the same way, like that's why it would be important for the business, like advertisers will spend a lot of money, to advertise on shows that have Emmy nominations, whereas the internet, you have just this vast sea of content. So you'd actually have to use your brain or use your gut or use your instincts when it comes to investing in an internet show the same way. But it's not like the number one thing that's in my head. It's not an obsession of mine by any means. Like I think overall, the most important thing is to just deliver good episodes of the show in the way that people watch it. But since there is sort of like an invitation to the party that's being presented, then yeah, I want to go.
It's interesting you talk about sort of how the format is steeped in kind of the language of old media and, linear television. Because, when you started in 2015, it was pre-peak podcast.
Yeah.
And, that show, like Sneaker Shopping and many of the things that we were launching back then, spoke in the language of television. And we now live in a marketplace that is flooded with 3-hour casual podcasts. And, to the credit of people like Rogan and Call Her Daddy and all of these people that have sort of these very informal formats, your show stands out in its sort of brevity, the tightness of the edit, the music, and the consistency of the format. Do you ever look at the marketplace and feel like there's some pressure to perhaps adjust or evolve the way you do things?
Well, I would say that when I look at that whole timeline, you're right. When we started, it was not so competitive and concentrated a market. A lot of those things have happened in the time since. So now I do think that we do have to be a little bit better in order to stand out in that way. But no, when I look around, there's nothing that I'm like jealous of, or there's nothing that I'm aspiring towards. And even when I look at this marketplace, it's like, yeah, you have a dominance of short form vertical video, right? And then you have these marathon podcasts that go for hours and hours and hours. If you look at prestige television, a lot of these dramas are now like an hour and 20 minutes, an hour and 30 minutes, like everything is like feature film length, marathon podcast, or just like a super short vertical video. And I've always thought, because this is the television that I grew up on, was that sitcom time slot, the 30-minute time slot, which to me is always going to work no matter how far away we get from that, because it's the type of viewing that invites a blanket, invites a snack, invites the couch, is bingeable without being a commitment. And I think that that's kind of an underserved audience. But that never came from looking at the marketplace or like looking at data. That was just like pure gut instinct on just the things that I watched growing up that informed and inspired me.
What do you make of, we talk about sort of the new modes of communication, and streaming is obviously something that has really sort of risen to the top. What do you make of the Cenats and the IShowSpeeds? Like, do you see that as competitive?
Well, it's a very cost-effective time to just entertain yourself, And so in that ways, I feel competitive with everything. But overall, I like the new formats, and these are exciting personalities and exciting entertainers. And I always think that, like what they do is so crazy. Like I was thinking, like watching Kevin Hart with like Kai and thinking about, oh, here's like a comedian who's got to be on for 10 and a half hours. Like that is interesting. Like the idea of that is all interesting, or like bleeding it out, or like having it stretch in that kind of way where anything can happen, but you kind of have to be tuned in live to catch it like off the thing. Like all of that stuff it actually is really interesting to me, and these things just keep popping up, and like I always think, like when we first started, it's like, oh, YouTube is like new, what I mean? Now I almost feel like YouTube is in the place that linear TV was at like when we started. You know what I mean? Where it's like these new platforms come out and they speak to a younger generation every time, and it's unique and it's interesting, and I'll see what happens from here. And then at times like this, I do say like, oh, well, thank goodness that I have that sort of I'm playing with house money anyway kind of situation, because the pace at which these things pop up and a new celebrity class is defined, I think that that'll just happen more and more frequently.
One of my favorite things with Hot Ones is the eclectic nature of the booking. You guys could have anyone from Currency to a Selena Gomez and Benny Blanco. What is the quality that you look for in an ideal guest?
So I think that you want variety in the guests in aggregate, right? And I do take a great deal of pride in exactly what you were describing, where, you'll have Bill Murray on one week and then Lisa from Blackpink on the next week, And I think that all comes from having one foot in the mainstream, one foot in the internet, which is all ties into even, how we approach making the show, where, yes, you have this unique novel hook, but it's also informed by things that are traditional. So I think towing that line is a good thing. As far as a guest goes, though, I like an ideal guest would be, to me, someone like Idris Elba, where in each wing, as you go deeper and deeper into the interview, it just peels another layer of the onion of his personality away, like somebody who's in movies, who also fights, is also a boxer, who also DJs, like somebody who's multifaceted and has all of these different interests and all of these different things that you can dig into. Like, that's what I really love about watching that episode. It's just like with every new question, you get deeper and deeper and deeper into the complicated, vast, and interesting world of Idris Elba. So that's probably my favorite, to sit down and talk to somebody like Bill Murray or Lady Gaga, like that's ideal for me. But I do find something special about interviewing Olivia Rodrigo when she's just about to go like this, or interviewing Shawn Mendes with the same thing, Billie Eilish with the same thing. Like I do like that time in a young artist's career.
Your bookings recently made the news because a DNC staffer leaked that you had passed on Kamala Harris for the show. And I think longtime fans of the show can look at your bookings and notice that you sort of seem to conspicuously avoid the Lex Friedman sphere of influence of politicians and technocrats, notably never having Elon or Zuckerberg or any of these types of people. Is that a conscious decision, and what is sort of animating that policy?
So, I mean, it's conscious. The way that I think about these things is Hot Ones as a show is one that celebrates more than it scrutinizes. Like I understand that and know that, and it kind of has to be that way because there's no way that you're just going to come at somebody, have the walls closing in, and then be like, okay, now will you try the devil's anus hot sauce? That's what we have next. Like that obviously doesn't work. And two, I think that a lot of times, like in this sort of tabloid, celebrity gossip, cottage industry that's always going to be a part of it. But I think with social media has kind of exploded. A lot of times guests can be defined by these controversial moments that to me are like less interesting than the body of work that they've created. So I actually just think that there's a marketplace opportunity to focus on those things rather than all of the noise. But I do think that when you're dealing with like an actual power broker, that kind of breaks down a little bit. When you're talking to a movie star and they have a new movie coming out, the stakes are so much lower. And I think that with a show like ours, I'm not sure the format is necessarily like up to the level that an interview like that would require. That being said, the rules seem to have completely changed. Like now there's an entire podcast ecosystem with these kinds of conversations. So that's the other side that I look at it is like, well, there's no shortage of available studios and microphones for these people to talk, like they're on camera all the time, like every single day. I don't think that we necessarily have to open the Hot One space to that, because what I'm trying to do at the end of the day is make escapism television. Like I'm trying to make comfort viewing. And I think right now, politics has penetrated so many aspects of popular culture, and overall they're just like bad vibes. So it's a good vibe show. They're kind of bad vibes. So I don't necessarily invite that or like want that or whatever, but things change all the time. Like I might change my mind about that tomorrow or the next day. But as of right now, I just think that like an audience just wants to be entertained, and a lot of this attention has already been hijacked by this class of people. And so I don't necessarily want to add to the static or to the volume of it.
Do you consider the show more entertainment than journalism?
100%. Like I don't think of myself as a journalist. Like I'm just a TV host, and the show is just meant to be entertainment. And it's supposed to be a dopamine hit. It's supposed to be a snack. It's a donut. Like that's what we are. Is we're a donut shop.
One of the real moments of inflection that I got to witness being in the office with you was the emergence of Brett Baker and his power ranking. What role did that play for you in sort of validating what you guys were doing, and how did it sort of change, how you saw the whole enterprise?
Well, first off, shout out to Brett Baker,
Yes.
lovely
Shout
guy.
out.
And what that showed me, what that illustrated, was that somebody really cares about this. Like this isn't just like a fleeting thing that someone's watching. And when you create a show, people are watching it, especially on YouTube. The views are right there. It's all transparent. But you don't get like a clap from the audience. Like there's no ovation. So it kind of does. It goes out. People are watching it. People are absorbing it. But you don't really feel it. So I think that Brett Baker was the first fan that made us feel like, oh, this is making an impact. Like this is influencing people's lives.
Do you go into the back end of YouTube and still look at all of the metrics? And
I never have in my life. I've never looked at a graph. I've never looked at a chart. I've never looked at an analytics page. I've never looked at the back end ever in my entire life.
how do you judge the success of an episode?
I know what's good. Like, I know what's good in the room. I know what's a good episode when I see one. I know the things that are going to move. I know the things that are going to spike. But that is just all from a gut place. Obviously, it's helpful to have someone like Chris because we can yin-yang that way. And I can be more shoot from the hip and more gut. And then he can be more analytical and smart. But overall, like, it's not that complicated. Like, you know a good movie when you see one. You know a good episode when you see it. Once we've made that, I know exactly how it's gonna work out. So, and it's in before the shoot even starts. You know, what it should look like, and then you're just trying to reverse engineer your vision of the episode in the actual room when you're just executing with a guest. So I never look at any of those things. The one thing I do look at is, you know, after I watch that episode on Thursday, I will like scroll the comments, you know, to see the kind of fan reaction to the episode. So that I think about and clock and care about. But any of the back end stuff, analytic stuff, like I've never looked at it my entire life.
Hosting an interview is a bit like, you know, engaging in a dance with someone.
Yeah.
Who has been the most challenging dance partner?
There are a couple that have been challenging over the years. I think athletes are oftentimes kind of a hard nut to crack because they're not necessarily incentivized by the personality. You know, it's like you make this shot or you throw that touchdown or you hit this home run, and that's how, you know, you can grow as a professional and make money. Whereas a musician or an actor or whatever, oftentimes there's this personality, this cult of personality thing that's all a part of it, which makes for like a great talk show guest, you know? But sometimes you'll just sit down with someone who's like traditionally thorny or something and try to win them over. So, you know, like Bob Odenkirk might be like challenging at first, but then you'll see a moment where the shoulders will drop and they'll be like, oh, this is a much different kind of interview than I was expecting when I walked in here. I just read the pitch about, you know, eating increasingly spicy chicken wings on YouTube.
Do you have a strategy to sort of engender that kind of comfort?
So I think with the first question is always kind of about the project. And we say like it's the question that'll get the publicist to sit down in the chair, you know, so that they're not like hovering around the set. So that's part. Like, yes, there's engineering that goes into all of that. So at first you're trying to just check the box and get the thing that you have to do out of the way, sit the publicist down, just put a ball on a tee for the guest, like a nice, easy, prosaic kind of question that they can just hit, and then we can move on to the next thing and hopefully get into this thoughtful career spanning interview. And then like wing 2, wing 3 will be kind of those attempts to just communicate to the person that you're talking to that, you know, we've met you halfway here. We're not going to just have you eat scorching hot chicken wings and then like we didn't care, you know, like I read the book, I watched the movies, you know, like I did all of the stuff, and we'll kind of like let you know in this part of the interview. And then hopefully that puts them into a relaxed enough state, or at least build enough of a sense of trust that the rest of the interview will be easier, you know, because at the end of the day, for an entertainment show, we are kind of at the mercy of the generosity of our guest. So the more you can get them to buy in, the more that they'll do on their end as far as giving effort to make this episode worth something watching. So that's kind of how I think about it.
To borrow a sort of classic Hot Ones binary question format, how has fame made you a better person, and how has it made you a worse person?
Well, I think that being recognizable, you meet so many people, you know, all the time. So I think it's actually made me like a citizen of the world in a unique way. You know, like I do like walking the streets of New York and like going to work and someone's like, hey, good morning, Sean, like that. You know, like I do like all of that. And I think it makes me appreciate people more in a unique way. That's probably a double-edged sword though too, because you can also feel like you're living in a constant surveillance state and you're approached all the time, and sometimes people are really excited to see you, and so you're trying to match that gigawatt energy and like just kind of seeing like the disappointment on their face when you're not as excited as they are to see them at Whole Foods or whatever. So I think that in that way, it's made me a better person, or at least given me a perspective that's been valuable that I otherwise wouldn't have. I think it's also given me a lot of confidence in myself. The success of the show has not just changed my life, but dozens of other people who work on the show, and that's all been very fulfilling. Like, this is a dumb idea between me and Chris, and now it's got, you know, over 40 full-time employees. So all of that is amazing and makes me better and more of a leader, and feel like I have a responsibility that's so much bigger than myself in a way that I otherwise wouldn't have experienced, or probably wouldn't have experienced. And then the way that it's made me worse is it is like, the way it's made me worse is that I expect now like every customer service issue to be solved by somebody who recognizes me. You know, like that's the best part of this whole thing, is like all of these problems are solvable if somebody like cares enough to do it, right? So then I think then when I get into that spot where I'm in line at the DMV or whatever, and I'm just dealing with like the normal everyday challenges, I think I have a lower tolerance for all of that, because sometimes stuff just gets fixed for me, that like now I just, you know, like there's a certain grind of life that I have no patience for anymore, in a way that I know I've been just corrupted forever and totally unsalvageable. A decade into it, the thing that motivates me to continue with Hot Ones is just the audience. I grew up on escapism television, so I know the kind of impact that can have on people and the kind of dopamine hit that it can give them in their week. And sometimes people really need that. So since we've been lucky enough to build this crazy audience, and I know that it has those effects at scale, that's what keeps me going.
You are now the proprietor and chief creative officer of First We Feast. You have been part of a group that has acquired the company from Buzzfeed. Putting yourself now in a C-suite executive role, what are the most important things that you learned sort of watching Rich and then watching Jonah, two obviously titans of industry?
Yeah, I mean, you gain an appreciation for the ways in which they're captaining a ship that's in a squall. Like my entire career in digital media has kind of felt like the final scene in Fight Club, where all the buildings are falling down around you and the floor is shaking under your feet, and you feel like it's only a matter of time before that goes down. But to their credit, where all of these things have gone underwater and sank, like he did fight through extremely challenging times. And you think about the pressure that they must have felt in those moments and the kind of face that they have to have when they're facing a board versus the face that they have when they're facing their employees versus when they're walking into an upfront and the kind of thing that they have to sell. There's a real appreciation for all of the things that you're juggling and all of the stakeholders that you have to satisfy along the way in order to make the right decision. I've gained an appreciation for that. And also, just seeing like a fight, especially in Rich, where I think I have some of those same qualities that, you can kind of lean into the visceral, the instinctive, the sort of halftime speech at the high school football game kind of mentality that I think is a good quality in a CEO like that. So respect to both of those guys because they've had very challenging jobs and have been up against a lot just in this kind of industry. So respect to them for the longevity that they've had doing that because, now I'm in like my first year in that kind of situation. And these are guys that have been doing it for a really long time. So I think I'll probably have more to say about that and more of a way that I can relate 10 years from now. But just starting the journey, I can already see some of what they had to contend with and the way that they carried themselves through that storm and the way that these brands still exist and this building's still up and the lights are still on. That is like in itself an amazing feat.
How did you and Chris go about putting together that investment group and getting the $80 million to make this acquisition?
Well, there was a lot of action around it, and it was just basically about finding the right partner that could satisfy some things that we needed. Like, I did think it was important for a show that's been going on as long as it's been going on that we had the back catalog. Like I said, I make a comfort show that I think is evergreen. So who knows, like maybe in the future, people will watch Hot Ones as a comfort show the way that they watch Friends as a comfort show or something like that. So there was that kind of idea that I had about just the back catalog, but then you also have the hot sauce business, you have the trademarks, you have the format, you have all the people that make this. There was, Chris was a little bit hamstrung, a little bit tied down, like he needed to be in a full-fledged CEO role. And we needed to be set up for success, and we needed to insulate ourselves from any sort of feedback creatively. Like we still needed to have our skunk works mentality in our operation. So that was really important to us. So it was about checking all of those boxes, but then also just extracting that Jenga piece, like pulling IP out of a publicly traded company while saving all of those things. It was a very complicated Jenga piece to pull out. And so basically we had to find a partner that we could check all of those boxes with in order to continue with the show, which, whatever, we probably could have done, but we needed something that galvanized us. And
how challenging were those negotiations and actually closing that deal?
It was complicated. It was turbulent. It was long. This is an over a year-long process to do something like this. There are good days. There are bad days. It was kind of like its own season of Succession. But I think the amazing thing is that we got to the other side, and that we did it, and which has been so satisfying because there were so many dark days over the course of this that I thought, well, that might be it, might be time to do something else or take on another project or move back to Chicago. Like all of those things go through your head in a moment like this. But luckily we were able to get 100% sign up to the new venture from the employees that were at First We Feast before this iteration. Chris is the CEO. We have the same people making this show that we love and lots of opportunities to add water and sunshine to the things that we want to do in the future. And that's all like really exciting, but just super proud that we were able to get this done because it was a very challenging high altitude tightrope walk.
Well, nobody spends $80 million to acquire an asset to continue status quo. I know this from being part of the complex acquisition that happened last year. What are your goals and what is the plan for the business?
So I think that, we did an event last year in Chicago with Stella Artois, and we did like a live viewing of a Hot Ones episode with David Beckham. We had like 300 people in there, and it was so great because I was back home, so I had like a ticket allotment of like 40 people. So it was all my friends and family in the first couple rows. And people could then get served wings, and they're eating along with the episode, which I think naturally you want to do as an audience member. And then we have these different surprises where like I come out at the end of the viewing, I'm like, thanks so much for coming, but we have some surprises for you. Please welcome to the stage football legend David Beckham. So then he comes out, we do a post-mortem on the episode, and then I do this thing where I'm like, all right, well, I just have one last question for you, and then this emergency broadcast thing happens behind the screen. It's like, and Ludacris joins, like, and he's like, hey, David, hey, Sean, I couldn't let you guys come to Chicago without doing something special, so live concert in the parking lot right now. So, and then everybody exits the auditorium, goes out, and Ludacris has a back alley concert in Chicago. And it was such an amazing experience. And you're like, oh, well, how can we duplicate this? How can we make this a thing? Like, how can this be something that we're doing? So before we'd never have that kind of option in order to, make some live tour event or whatever. And then now something like that is on the table. But overall, I think it's just the opportunity to build out the programming flight. And Chris, I know, has a bunch of big ideas and things that he wants to do. But I also think as someone who tries to keep the main thing is that's got to be where my priorities are, and just making sure that on Thursday, fans have a satisfying episode of Hot Ones that scratches the itch for them. Like, that is the most potent part of this whole thing. That's what everything else was built upon. So you can't lose sight of the significance of that. So to me, as much as things will change, as much as we'll try to boom zoom straight to the moon and do all the different things, like, I think that the important thing is to just have like a measured and sober understanding of why we are where we are, and that's because people really like Hot Ones. And so we got to make sure that every Thursday at 11 a.m. we give them something that scratches the itch.
Sean, thank you so much for all the time, candor, energy, and wisdom.
Thank you, and it's good to come full circle with this. Everybody here has basically full visibility on every square inch of my professional life. And as you know, and I've told you before, I was such a fan of yours before I ever had a job here, and was kind of in awe of you the first time I saw you. And I was like, oh, wow, like Noah just walks the halls here. So it's great to see you on the other side of this big, long journey that we've had in a moment like this. So thanks so much for having me, Noah.